The question that got me started this week is, why do we come here? Why do we form a congregation? Why are we here? The most frequent reason people give me when I ask congregants is for community. But I am suspicious of that answer. Not that it's untrue, and not that community is not life-saving all by itself, but because I do not think that community is the sole, whole, or even fundamental reason why we gather. It's part of the reason, but it's a tip of the iceberg answer. As a response, I do not think that it is terribly reflective, and I do not believe that it gets to the underlying need and wisdom of what brings us together. The tip of the iceberg is the least telling part. I mean, I know there are a lot of good-looking people here who are both funny, kind, handy in a knife fight, and for some reason needed here. But the Sierra Club and Progressives of Tucson, Legislative District 9 meetings have people who are also funny, kind, handy in a knife fight, and for some reason needed there. But we're different. I mean, we're different, aren't we? And truly, we forget that at our peril. Anyone want to take a crack at how we are different than those valuable and worthy organizations? What comes to mind? You don't have to be right. I'm hoping that you're not right, actually. We take Sunday for meetings. That's one way.
Independent thinkers.
Independent thinkers.
No creed.
No creed.
We have a spiritual purpose.
A spiritual purpose. Now we're cooking.
We face the ultimate of death.
We what?
Face the ultimate end of death.
We face, on purpose, we face the ultimate end of death. Yeah. Kathy?
I think we're here because we share the value of love.
Ooh. And Pam?
I was just gonna say, taking off on what you said over there, there is a spiritual lens to making decisions, so sometimes not just a secular or political lens to look at things.
Okay, one more, Eb.
Because the coffee worked.
The coffee work. All of that works very well with what I'm about to say, I hope. Speaking of love, right? This is a lesson that my intern minister gave me when I was serving in Ogden, Utah. She said that I don't have to like everyone in the congregation, but I do have to love everyone in the congregation. And the same is true for everyone in the congregation. And I'm happy to say that by and large, this congregation lives into that. This congregation has a lot of love for one another. Even when there's not necessarily a like for one another. That happens, we're people. But the love overcomes that. And I'm happy to be here because of it. But, when I think about it, love is more of our mode than our reason for coming here. It is what we do when we get here, is what we encourage each other to do, but I'm not quite sure if that's exactly what gets us out of bed in the morning to come here. Why do we come here? Why do we form a congregation? It's not easy to answer, and I think UUs have a particularly difficult time. Well, UUs don't do easy answers anyway, right? I mean, Thank goodness, that's why we're here. You know, other traditions have ready-made answers to that question. Why do we come together to praise the Lord, to submit to the will of God, to free the world from suffering, or be absolved in Christ?
Saving sin.
Saving or being saved from sin? We don't have a ready-made answer to that question. And, you know, I think our difficulty in answering that question might make us more legitimate than less legitimate. But that is, of course, only if we engage it. Only if we wrestle with it. And I believe reflecting on this question, why do we gather, is absolutely essential to the next phase of our journey together as a congregation. That question can be a pole star. The question is, why do we need or want to create this sanctuary? The answer includes the notion that we gather because life is sometimes hard and sometimes lonely. Yes, it includes that. And also because when life is good, you want people to share it with. In other words, it includes community. The answer includes community, but it's more than that. It's more than that. So what is it? Why do we gather in this form? For what true and underlying reason do we gather? And I submit to you that it is critical that we reflect on what that answer might be, because otherwise we run a terrible risk. And in times when there is a lot to do, it is a risk that becomes amplified and all the more insidious. Insidious is a strong word, but it's true. Because if we lose sight of the true and fundamental reason why we gather, other, more superficial reasons will take their place. Reasons that are not sustainable. Reasons that blow away in a storm. So I've told this analogy before, but I think it bears repeating. You know, nobody ever woke up one Sunday morning and decided that they needed to go to church because that church needed a window washer. They decided they needed to go to church because there was some fundamental issue that they wanted to wrestle with, or some trouble in their lives that they needed help with. Something deep and profound got them out of bed, got them past the Sunday Times and into their car and into this room. And once they come here, this is a great place to be. They have a good time. They start wrestling with and dealing with these issues. And they find that they want to join this community. And so they do. And then, because they are grateful to this community for all the help that it has provided them, they want to give back. And they do that in a number of ways. And let's say one of the ways that they give back is by washing the windows, because windows need washing. Time goes on, and this person washes the windows and washes the windows. And after a while, the reason that got that person into church becomes a little bit hazy. And if somebody leans against that window with their hand during coffee hour, that person loses it and goes over and gets very upset with the person who's smudging their work, because the window washing has replaced the reason for their coming to church. And now the reason they come to church is to wash the windows. Or make the coffee. Now, coffee needs to be made. Windows need to be washed. But that is not the reason why we come to church. And I've seen this happen time and again at almost every church that I've ever attended or worked for. And I have certainly been guilty of it myself. There's another good story that illustrates this point. Has anyone read Winnie the Pooh? Has anyone read the Tao of Pooh? Okay, so you remember the story of Rabbit, and he's on his way to Christopher Robin's house, and he's feeling very important because he's telling everybody that he sees along the way that he's got very important stuff to do, and he's going to Christopher Robin's house, and every person that he sees sort of reinforces this notion that he's important because he's very busy. He's got things to do. And then he shows up at Christopher Robin's house, and Christopher Robin isn't there. But he's left a note for anybody who might come by. He's gone out, Baxon, busy Baxon, CR. Now, at the end of the story, it turns out that Christopher Robin was going to school, and the note the next day actually has it spelled the right way. Gone out, busy, back soon. I'm busy, I'll be back soon. Right? But Rabbit reads this and sees gone out, Baxon, busy Baxon. And he's thinking to himself that he thought that he thinks busy Baxon is a thing to be. And he thought that he was the busy Baxon. But it turns out that Christopher Robin is the busy Baxon. And so Rabbit is disappointed. He's sad. But that's because, Rabbit's self-worth in this story was not rooted in his inherent dignity or in his inherent worth. It was rooted in what he was doing and how busy he could be or appear to be doing it. So it's a question of confusing Rabbit's use for Rabbit's reason for doing what Rabbit is doing. In our case, confusing our usefulness or our function with our faith. And this is not entirely your fault or our fault. In this case, we are equal parts perpetrator and victim, because the impulse to confuse oneself with one's usefulness arises out of the culture that we participate in. Worth and justification through use is a question and concern that arises out of a consumerist culture. Where value is measured in usefulness. I don't mean to throw away our entire culture, but this is one of the dark sides. And that is one reason why we come here, to practice extricating ourselves from the consumerist mindset that oppresses our days and tells us we are only worth anything if we are useful. Here, of all places, we should strive to not replicate that mindset. We should rather find ourselves and find in each other some deeper reservoir of worth. So perhaps we should just embrace the truth that we just aren't all that useful. Or really more likely that our usefulness is limited. Each of us have a very narrow band on the spectrum of life in which we are useful, and a narrow band within the spectrum of our own life in which we are useful. How wise is it then to base our sense of worth upon our sense of usefulness? Remember the stonecutter, the discovery that the stonecutter made. That his work was not what determined, in his case, how happy he was or satisfied with his life. And the point of that story, and this reflection, by the way, is not to denigrate use. Things need to happen. Work needs to be done. The world needs stonecutters. This church needs clean windows. But the stonecutter needs to know that his worth is born well before his occupation. And in a similar way, we use proclaim our faith that worth is inherent. And then the question becomes, is it more wise to base our sense of worth on ineffable faith or upon measurable use? It's a worthwhile question. I think I'm sticking with faith. I suppose that's not a big surprise. Faith for me is powerful and enduring. And I believe that it is more wise to base our sense of worth on mere faith. Faith transcends and includes use. Faith is powerful because of what it asks of us. And what it asks is that we operate not contrary to evidence necessarily, but beyond the field of evidence. What you take there, how you are there, nobody can take away. That's its power. Use all the evidence. Take evidence with you. Find its edge, and then leap into the faith that everyone has inherent worth and dignity. That is a statement of faith, not fact. It cannot be proven. In many ways, there is more evidence to its contrary, right? It is a statement of faith, which means it is up to you. Now, as we have seen, we use couple dignity with worth in our principles. The inherent worth and dignity of every person. Now, I actually think that dignity is earned, even as it is organic and inherent. It is earned by by us having to walk with the inherent tragedies of our life and living. So for me, even though it's inherent because of the difficulties that we are sure to face, that we will wrestle with them, and thereby we earn our dignity. So I'm splitting hairs, but they're important hairs. Worth is different, though. Worth, where dignity is about behavior, worth is about value. And that value is not based on our usefulness, but upon the miracle of your life and upon the faith that value, the faith that value is inherent to us and comes to us unearned. We do not have to work to have value. We do not have to work on our worth. And in this tradition, that means that worth speaks to grace. We did not earn it. And grace thereby invites humility. We did not earn it. So the trick of raising up our value by believing that it is inherent is that instead of making us privileged brats, it instills in us a sense of gratitude. For we did nothing to earn it, nothing to inherit it. And that is another reason why we come together, to find power in the corporate practice of our faith. That we have inherent worth, to find corporate power in our response to that grace. In many ways, it for me, often comes down to power. And I don't mean power over, but power within. In this way, worth being beyond use, if it's a more powerful way to be, worth being beyond use, ironically becomes more useful. When our work is grounded in faith, the work is easier to sustain, and its outcomes reflect the wisdom of our tradition. So 2 people doing the same job at church. One does the job for busy backs and window washer reasons. That is, reasons grounded in a sense of unworth, because they need that job to feel worthy. At least in part. Always seeking to redeem a self thought less than. The other does a job in touch with the wisdom and hope of our faith, grounded in the deep sense of grace given worth. The job might be building repair, it might be civil disobedience, it might be window washing. But when it gets tedious or when it gets violent, which one stays? When it doesn't go your way, when you don't win, or someone smudges the window or puts you in jail, which one stays? Faith, not use, sustains us. And in the coming months, we will need that faith. Last week, we reflected on how we might keep cool in the midst of turmoil. It's a worthwhile thing to consider and applicable to life generally in its broadest view, as well as in all the particular situations of our days. But it is also notably applicable to our coming congregational move. As a congregation, for those of you who are new here or just way out of the loop, we're moving. We're moving locations. And that is bound to bring with it some stress and strain and the discomfort of uncertainty at the least. So it would serve us well to continue to reflect on how we are going to keep our center copacetic while the scenery shifts all around us. You'll recall, perhaps, that I suggested there are 2 ways we may accomplish that kind of equanimity. Does anyone remember what they are?
Be weird.
Be weird. Yeah, gird for the weird was one way. The other way? Did anyone ever see? There's a Beatles movie, and they were trying to get a jewel out of something, and the jeweler was trying to cut it out, and I think John says, "Jeweler, you're failing." Can you remember the second reason? Congregation? Covenant. Covenant. Girding for the weird and covenant. Bingo. That was... Oh, by the way, we will need to have a workshop on bingo in the coming days, because you guys did not remember how to play bingo. So, yes, covenant and girding for the weird. We practice girding for the weird, and we practice our covenant. And if this is wisdom, it is applicable not only to our congregational life, but to our everyday and every moment of our lives. Gird for the weird, return to the covenant. So tell me, when we get a bit anxious or irate or disappointed or frightened or exasperated, do we throw in the towel or throw it in somebody else's face? No. Well, then what do we do when we get a bit anxious or irate or disappointed or exasperated? Because that's going to happen. What do we do? I say we practice. We practice. What do we practice? We practice girding for the weird. We practice our covenant. We practice our faith, our principles. Now, practice takes work. The wisdom is simple. The wisdom is simple. Embrace the weird, return to the covenant. Practice inherent worth and dignity. That wisdom is simple. It's a simple solution. But it's hard to do. It takes work. It takes practice. But that is what we come together to do every Sunday. We come here to practice our covenant together, to practice girding for the weird. There will be much work needed between now and the first Sunday that we worship in our new building. There will be a lot of really important logistics and roles and work. Lots of stones to be cut, and lots of windows to be washed, and plenty of coffee needed to be brewed. But none will be more important than the work of practicing our covenant, practicing our weirdness, and practicing our faith. So why do we come together as an intentional religious community? I would say it's to practice living and thinking counter to the consumerist mindset that insinuate our days, to practice finding ourselves beyond use, to practice gratitude for that gift of finding ourselves beyond use, and to find power in the practice of our faith, and to find in our faith a course for that power that is a gift to the world.